everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game on the PS2, and that happens to be Seven Blades. And it was developed and published by Konami, and it was released in the year 2000 for Japan, and 2001 for Europe, and we never got this one in North America. And before you ask, no, this is not a simple series game. So this is just a full-out action game mixed of hack and slash and shooting. But one thing you might not have known, at least if you just randomly seen this game, is that this game is actually based after a movie. And no, the movie is not called Seven Blades, the movie is called Z-Pang. And that came out in 1990. And I have yet to see this movie, but just from looking into it, it looks like it's like one of those like super over-the-top action films, kinda similar to Kill Bill. Now, I could be totally off on that, but I'm just taking a guess here just from what I've seen with pictures and also after playing through this game. Also, I should mention that this is not the first time that this film was adapted into a game. There was one that came out around the time when the movie came out, and that was on the PC Engine, but that one played more like a puzzle platformer similar to Solomon's Key. And just for shits and giggles, I should also mention that if you first type in Z-Pang into Google search, the first thing that will pop up is an anime and manga series just called Z-Pang. It's unrelated, but I figured I'd mention it anyway. Okay, one last thing before we talk about the game is that the director of the movie, Kaizo Hayashi, was also the creative director for this game. So at least it's kinda interesting that they got the director involved with it. So yeah, let's talk about the game's story first. So there are two main characters in this one. So the first one is Gokura, and by the way, that's not his full name, but that's just what I'm calling him because it's just a lot easier to say. So he's a mercenary who can actually wield 7 different weapons. And the other one is a female that he's in love with, and that happens to be Oyuri. And she's a firearm user, but of course, Gokura does have an assistant to help carry all his weapons, and that happens to be Tojizo, I believe. So the island Dejima is being attacked by an army of ninjas flying around in flying saucers that look like ninja stars. And if that's not bad enough, there's also a giant golden dragon that shoots lasers. So the story progresses differently depending on which character you pick. And as you would expect, they do intertwine with each other at certain parts. And that's basically what you need to know about the story. It's pretty over-the-top shit. So now, let's get moving on to the gameplay. So depending on the character that you pick, the gameplay is slightly different. So if you pick Gokura, you're going to be playing a hack and slash since he uses melee weapons. And if you pick Oyuri, then you're going to be playing a third-person shooter for that she uses firearms. But the concept is pretty much the same. It's all broken down into stages, and the goals usually vary, either going from point A to point B, defeating all the enemies in the room, or even protecting a certain character. And every so often you do get into boss fights. So for the most part, this game is like a non-stop action scene. Although there are some parts that can be a little bit tricky to figure out where you're going, but that's why you gotta make sure to follow your radar. And I was surprised to know that some of the stages in here are actually kinda big. Now obviously, when I mean the stages are big, I'm not talking like an open world RPG kind of shit. I'm talking like it's big for like this kind of gameplay style. So now, as for the game's controls, well, it really depends on the character that you pick. So I'll talk about Oyuri's first because that was the one that I played through the entire game with. And the controls for it are alright. So moving around is obvious. You jump with X and you shoot shit with circle. Triangle is to dodge. And holding square allows you to access the quick menu where you can equip guns and eat food. But here's the really fucked up part, is that controlling the camera, you'd think it would be the right analog stick, but no, instead it's the R2 and L2. Now that is such a dated concept, like my god. But not only is it just annoying to work with, but also the camera angles in this game can be pretty shitty at times. To put it in perspective, the camera work in this game is like probably the equivalent of Mario 64, and granted that's a really good game, but the thing is though, the camera work is definitely one of the weakest parts of that game, where here, well, it's like a couple years later and it ain't much better. And holding L1 is to lock on. And when you're actually locked onto an enemy, it does feel okay, at least it works. But sometimes it can be a little annoying for that it can make you face like directly what's in front of you and it won't lock onto the enemy, so you gotta like press and hold it again. But I should also mention that the dodging and the jumping does feel pretty stiff. But the jumping specifically is even worse for that it's also pretty damn slow. Although thankfully you really don't need the jump all that much. But it is important to note that if you do plan on jumping around as her on the buildings, then yeah, it will feel pretty slow. But other than that, everything else does work okay for what it is. But now, as for Goku's controls, now to say they are fucking ass is an understatement, because they are pretty fucking horrible. So the button layout is pretty much the same for the most part, but obviously instead of shooting, you're running around hitting things. And jumping as him feels even worse for that he does like a dinky jump, which just sucks. And as for the triangle button, well, it just kinda does whatever it wants. I think it has like a multi-purpose thing, but it always seems to do a different thing every time. So from what I've seen, it could either be a shitty dodge, or it could be a kick, or a headbutt, and I can't seem to figure out how to do each of these things. And with R1, you get the block, but the blocking in this game doesn't seem to work half the time. Now maybe you gotta do a perfect timing thing, but I have no idea, I never seem to get it to work at all. But easily the worst part about it would have to be the attacking in this game. Now the response timing on it seems okay, but the biggest problem is, and this is just really fucked up, no matter which way you're facing, you're always gonna attack forward. Now when you're locked onto someone, it does help a little bit, but the big problem with locking on is that you're going to be focused on one target, and there's like a lot of enemies that will try and surround you, so it kind of leaves you wide open. But yeah, overall, his controls just play terribly. Like even Dynasty Warriors 2, which by today's standards is also a very outdated game, but even that one controlled better than this. So if you can obviously tell that Oyuri's story was a lot better taken care of, which is kind of funny. So now, let's move on to the other things, like the graphics. Now, for the time that this game came out, I think they do look okay. I mean, yeah, some of the 3D buildings in this game do look a little bit like a nicer looking PS1 game, but I do think the character models do look pretty good for what they are. Also, the graphics for the cutscenes are not too bad either, but I do like some of the set pieces that you get to go to. But probably my favorite part about this game would have to be some of the enemy designs, is that, man, are they fucking crazy. So at first, you fight a bunch of like samurais and ninjas, you know, seems typical. But then later on, you get to fight flying paper dolls, and then you get to fight robots, and if you think that's crazy, you get to fight robots riding in a giant robot. But probably the most terrifying enemy that you get to fight in this game is the monster that looks like the Dead Hand from Ocarina of Time, you know, the boss underneath the well. Yeah, it's just complete batshit. So a lot of the enemy variety does get pretty crazy. Same thing with the bosses too. For one example is that you get to fight a fat guy who shoots missiles out of his body, and not only that, but you're fighting him in a room where a lot of enemy soldiers are dancing with each other. Like, what? So I have to give them credit that they did get some pretty creative ideas for enemies and bosses. But yeah, overall, the graphics are not the most mind-blowing thing ever, especially looking at them from today's standards, but I think they look okay for the time. Not great, but not terrible. So now, as for the game's music, well, the music in this game is really forgettable and I really couldn't remember it at all. And this is from a Konami game, which have always put out great music within their games for the most part, so that's kind of unfortunate. But I really have no idea what else to say about it, it's just kinda there. So now, if you want to go out and buy this game, well, I couldn't find that many copies online, but from what I have seen, they were mostly from Japan, and the Japanese ones were going for about $10 to $12, usually between there, or even a little bit less, or a little bit more. But as for the PAL region copies, I only seen one, and it was from Australia, and it was going for $24.87. But I didn't see any others to compare it to, that was the only one. And like I said at the beginning, if you're from North America, this game was not released over here, so if you want to own a copy to play it, well, you have to have a way to play import games on your PS2, or you gotta emulate it. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Seven Blades, is that this game is very mixed for me. So the half of the game that you're using Oyuri, I thought was actually okay. I mean, it wasn't like an amazing game or anything like that, but I thought it was at least a very playable game that was... yeah, it was alright. Now, of course, it does have its issues, but I didn't think it was, like, really bad or anything. But as for Goku's story mode, to be honest, I really couldn't get far into it because his story mode was just such shit. Like, that part of the game was just really bad. because the game was just so frustrating because the controls were just so fucked up. Like, this game has its challenging parts for sure, no doubt about it, but his story mode was challenging for all the wrong reasons. Like, it was almost like Simple Series bad. But to be positive on one thing is that even his story mode and this game in general is still way better than Crime Life Gang Wars on PS2 and Xbox, which is also a Konami game, and surprisingly enough, apparently it was designed by Hideo Kojima. Not sure how true that is, but if so, well damn, that's one hell of a turd he just took. So yeah, it's really hard to recommend this game for that. Half of it is like kinda decent, while the other half is just really bad. But if there is one plus thing about this game that does make it a little bit more entertaining, at least playing as Oyuri, is that this game is actually pretty damn hilarious, just with how ridiculous this game can get. But it really makes me wish that this game had an English dub, because I have a feeling if this game did have one, it would just be comedy gold. But, oh well, even in Japanese voices, this game is still pretty damn funny. But with that said, it's definitely not the best at what it does. And I guess it really does feel like a B-movie. And maybe that's what they were going for, given that this is based after a movie that is probably really over the top. But yes, it's a tough one to recommend for that. It's really just not a great game whatsoever, but if you do turn your brain off, it can be okay. At least half of it. But anyways, with that being said, thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day. Seven
Blades of Steel.
And then he died.